We're going to call to order the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. I know we're shy one witness whom we're trying to locate. Apparently there are some issues getting into the building today with everybody in town. So we're going to proceed with the testimony of our witnesses and our opening statements, and we have somebody out looking for Ms. McAuliffe. And hopefully this will time out well. But with 7 bills on the agenda, we felt it important to move forward. And maybe we can close those doors too, if somebody on the staff can. Yeah, thank you. Well, good morning. Today's hearing will examine 7 important bills, all seeking to improve the way our communication laws work and better reflect modern technology and consumer expectations. 2 of these bills deal with important public safety issues and how to improve emergency response when it matters most. First, the Kelsey Smith Act, sponsored by Representative Kevin Yoder, gives law enforcement the tools to locate victims in emergencies using location data from their cell phone providers. By creating a very narrow set of circumstances in which law enforcement can access these type of data, the bill seeks to protect the privacy of users while still allowing access when the situation demands it. This bill utilizes existing technology to help law enforcement better respond when someone is in serious danger. It's important to note, however, that the legislation does not place the burden of liability on cell phone carriers. The decision is in the hands of law enforcement, and carriers should be able to hand over the data without fear of a lawsuit. I intend to offer an amendment at subcommittee markup that will make sure that a carrier's customer service representative isn't faced with making a decision about whether complying with a request from law enforcement opens the company or individual up to liability. The Kelsey Smith Act is already law in 22 of our states, including in my own state of Oregon, where it passed in 2014. So the bill we're looking at today mirrors much of the language in the Oregon statute, giving law enforcement the ability to act quickly when every second counts, but only in narrow circumstances of a true emergency. It's important to note that this legislation, as being proposed here today, passed unanimously through both the Oregon House and the Oregon Senate and was signed into law by a Democratic governor, demonstrating that this is not a partisan issue, but it is good policy. Another important piece of public safety legislation before the committee today is Carey's Law, which requires that multi-line telephone systems, typically found in hotels, offices, and schools, have a default configuration to dial out to 911 without any additional prefix required. To quote FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, "You may only call 911 once in your life, but it will be the most important call you'll ever make." As Carey's father will testify today, children are taught from an early age to dial 911 in an emergency. There should be no question that when they do so, they will reach the emergency dispatcher. The simple fix that this bill provides, one that has been already implemented by many MLTS users, has the potential to prevent another tragedy like the one that happened to Carey Hunt. I'd like to especially thank Carey's father, Mr. Hunt, Kelsey's mother, Mrs. Smith, for agreeing to testify today. While your losses must be very difficult to discuss in public, your testimony is certainly important in our process here as a resource for the subcommittee as we work on this legislation. So we're very thankful that you're willing to be here. We're also going to look at a bill from Representative Austin Scott, which caps the lifeline portion of the Universal Service Fund. In many ways, I wish we didn't have to take up this legislative piece of legislation, take this step we're doing today. Capping the fund is well within the authority of the Federal Communications Commission and something that they came close to doing in the most recent Lifeline reform order. Unfortunately, that did not happen. As a result, we're left with the so-called budget for the fund, a provision that requires the FCC to take note when annual Lifeline spending exceeds $2 billion and have the staff explain why that spending is so high. That's it. The FCC can basically blow right through its quote-unquote budget by as much as it desires. I don't think this is the way government should be handling the American people's dollars, with cavalier disregard for basic fiscal discipline. I want to be clear, we do not support eliminating the Lifeline subsidy. This is an important program for those who are truly eligible. We're not opposed to the mission of Lifeline. Universal connectivity is a core principle in this country, particularly for those who need it most, like children from low-income families. What we cannot support, however, is a fund that lacks external controls and is susceptible to waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, we've seen in the past how rapidly this fund can expand. I believe it's our duty and a duty to our constituents to make sure that their money is only spent responsibly. So the reforms that the FCC has adopted over the past few years, including some adopted this month, are certainly positive steps toward a more accountable fund. But until there are better, more effective guardrails in place, there's nothing to prevent the FCC from spending and spending and spending, placing an even greater burden on American household budgets who have to assume those costs. Real budgets that can't simply keep spending other people's money is what we need. In addition to these three bills, we'll look at a bill to encourage innovative solutions to the spectrum crunch, a problem we've been spending a great deal of time on in our subcommittee. We'll look at Ranking Member Pallone's bill to improve post-disaster communications. That's something that he is unfortunately all too familiar with after Superstorm Sandy wreaked havoc across his district and all of New Jersey. We'll also consider a bill to allow skilled nursing facilities to improve their broadband connectivity. And finally, we'll look at a bill to increase penalties for criminals who spark an unnecessary and dangerous law enforcement response by falsifying caller ID. So I'd like to thank all the sponsors on both sides of the aisle for bringing these bills to our subcommittee. And I want to thank the witnesses that we have before us today. With that, I would yield back the balance of my time and recognize the distinguished ranking subcommittee member from California, Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you, and thank you to the panelists for being here today, especially on the two bills that that the chairman raised first in his opening comments. We appreciate it. We're advancing several bipartisan bills today that are going to make progress in a number of critical areas. I'm disappointed that the subcommittee has once again chosen to target the FCC's Lifeline program. The name of the program is highly instructive, Lifeline. And we know, I think better than the rest of the entire Congress, that because of the issues that we deal with, that wireless mobile services today are an essential in our day-to-day lives for everything across the board, whether it's commerce, employment, employee, shopping, education, you name it, we are all dependent upon it. And so are poor people in our country. So I think that this bill imposing an arbitrary cap on the Lifeline program of $1.5 billion, eliminate the program's support for voice-only mobile services within 2 years, and prohibiting Lifeline from being used to subsidize the sale or lease of a mobile phone is damaging to a part of our population that needs these services just as much as we do, just as much as our children do. Really not any different, if not even more. So, and if it were enacted into law, the Curb Lifeline Act would deny millions of low-income Americans access to basic communication services. And that includes, as I said, so many of the functions that we undertake in life every day. According to the Universal Service Administrative Company, only 33% of eligible households, or approximately 13 million American households, participated in the Lifeline program as of October 2015. This means that more than 26 million households qualified for the program but didn't participate. So capping the Lifeline program would prevent these eligible households from accessing the Lifeline service if they apply after the budget cap has been reached. And they're just mentioning about a budget. We don't have a budget. We're not doing a budget. So now if a household happens to fall on hard times, a cap on Lifeline's budget would arbitrarily punish these Americans. And I just think that this is eminently unfair, and I think that our committee can do much, much better than this. So I'm disappointed. I hope, Mr. Chairman, that you and our colleagues will work with us to see if we can't come up with a better way of addressing this. I know that there has been things that have gone wrong with the program. There's something that's gone wrong with every program in the country, and it's up to Congress to reform and to, as well as the executive branch, to do what they need to do. Just last week, the FCC fined a Lifeline provider $51 million for enrolling ineligible and duplicate customers, the largest fine that the Commission has proposed against a Lifeline provider. So we're not opposed to going after bad actors when taxpayer dollars are involved in it. So I hope that we can work together on this, because I think it's a historic moment for those who understand that expanding broadband to low-income households is going to help lift our country up. We know, even in the presidential campaign, that there is a great debate about inequality in our country. This increases the inequality. This creates an even larger gap. This doesn't do anything to lessen that gap. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. Again, thank you to the witnesses and to the sponsors of legislation, the bills that are before us. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady for her comments. I recognize the gentlelady from Tennessee.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can I ask for unanimous consent to place the opening statement of Ms. Matsui in the record, and also several letters from business, from National Congress of American Indians. Well, there are, I think, 5 letters here I'd like to submit for the record.
We've reviewed them
Thank
without
you.
objection.
Thank you,
They will be
Mr.
entered in
Chairman.
the record at the appropriate location. We'll now recognize the gentlelady from Tennessee, the Vice Chair of the full committee, Ms. Blackburn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to say a welcome to our witnesses. Mr. Hunt, I want to especially welcome you and thank you for your willingness to share your story. We're appreciative of that. I want to also mention Ms. Matsui's Spectrum Challenge bill. This is something that I am pleased that we're going to discuss today. I think it does really focus the efforts on spectrum efficiency, and I'm appreciative of that. We need to discuss spectrum efficiency. I also had noted the CTIA report, which talks about the 350 megahertz of spectrum that are going to be needed by 2019. And whether it is that report or looking at the Cisco estimates of how many wireless devices, the Internet of Things, the utilization, expansion of spectrum, that is something we need to be thoughtful as we make decisions and approach this. We don't want to get into a spectrum crisis or a spectrum crunch. We know to each of you that us being diligent and doing the due diligence, if you will, on this issue is going to be important. So we're going to look forward to discussing that further. I will yield, Mr. Chairman, to any members on our side that Mr. Pompeo is seeking time. I yield the remainder to Mr. Pompeo.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. I want to talk about an important piece of legislation that was originally offered by Representative Yoder, my colleague from Kansas, and on which I was an original co-sponsor. It's now been close to 8 years since Kelsey Smith, an amazing young Kansas woman, was abducted from a shopping center parking lot in broad daylight. This horrible crime was captured on a security camera outside the Target store she was visiting that day to purchase an anniversary gift for her boyfriend. Her abduction wasn't done under the cover of night, and there was no question about the urgency of the situation. And it was at this moment the clock started ticking. 3 hours is what law enforcement tells you is the critical window to increase the chances of returning an abducted child alive. 180 minutes is not a lot of time, and I'm sure that for a parent praying for the safe return of their child, their son or daughter, each second that slips by is pure hell. In this case, it took 4 days to identify the location of Kelsey. It's just Kansas common sense that law enforcement should have a way to quickly find the location of a wireless telecommunications device if a person has been determined to be at risk of death or serious physical harm, due to being kidnapped or reported missing. This bill, the Kelsey Smith Act, does just that. At the same time, it maintains privacy protections for all the other information, including calls made, received, and text messages. The only thing that would be disclosed is the location, the all-critical location of that cell phone. Mr. Chairman, 22 states have done this. It is truly a shame that we have not been able to pass this legislation at the federal level. It is tragic indeed. But Kelsey's legacy is not one of tragedy. Great things have happened all across the country. There was a 6-year-old boy saved in your state, Ms. Blackburn, in Tennessee, from a suspected rapist because the state had implemented the Kelsey Smith Act. It is a legacy of countless others who live today because of her work and the work of her parents, one of whom will be testifying before us this morning. I strongly support this legislation and encourage my colleagues to join me in urging for its swift passage. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman might want to yield to Mr. Latta, who
Yes,
is seeking time.
it's Ms. Blackburn's time. I'll yield to Mr. Latta.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman from Kansas for yielding, and I thank the chairman for holding today's hearing and on these 7 bills which aim to advance public safety and reform outdated FCC programs. And if I could just start, in my 11 years that I was in the Ohio General Assembly, I chaired the Judiciary Committee and I chaired the Criminal Committee in the House, in the State House, and I appreciate the family for being here, because I know, listening to the testimony for 11 years, I unfortunately saw the most horrific and the most tragic events that occurred in the state of Ohio, and I appreciate you all for being here. And then again, the horrific tragedies that brought forth the Kelsey Smith Act and Kerry's Law Act both have tangible solutions that will help save lives. In case of emergency situations, we need to ensure assistance is easily accessible and provide law enforcement the necessary information to locate individuals in order to prevent serious physical harm. Again, I commend these families for sharing their stories and seeking to protect others by urging changes in the law. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses and hope today's discussion generates ideas that will provide public safety and accountability at the Commission. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman, and I'll now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Plone, for opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and our ranking member issue. And thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging that the families of Carrie Dunn and Kelsey Smith are in the hearing room and testifying today, and I understand that a terrible tragedy has befallen your families, and I'd like to thank you for your courageous activism on these issues. Many of the bills we're discussing today deal with public safety issues, which is particularly timely since this is National Public Safety Telecommunications Week. Telecommunications plays a critical role in public safety, and ensuring people have access to communication services can make all the difference during an emergency. We learned firsthand in New Jersey during Hurricane Sandy that calling for help is difficult when the power is out. And when the cell towers are also down, it's nearly impossible. We need to do better. We need to be better prepared, because no one should be left with silence on the other end of the call when they dial 911. I'd like to thank Chairman Walden for adding 3 Democratic bills to today's hearing, including my bill, the Securing Access to Networks and Disasters, called the Sandy Act. The bill has a number of straightforward proposals that, like the other bills introduced by my Democratic colleagues, should garner bipartisan support. The Sandy Act would recognize the critical role that all communication providers, broadcasters, cable, and telecommunications serve in emergencies, but most notably, the bill would ensure consumers have access to wireless service even if their particular wireless network goes down. I look forward to hearing more about all the other bills on today's agenda. Unfortunately, I must express serious concerns about one bill, H.R. 4884, which would cap the Lifeline program. In some ways, it makes sense that a Lifeline bill is teed up with the other public safety bills we're considering today, because our phones truly are lifelines. They are the essential life-saving devices that we keep with us every day. But unlike the other bills we're considering today that propose ways to improve public safety, This bill to curb the Lifeline program would take essential life-saving devices away from the people who need help the most. Millions of low-income Americans rely on this program to provide them with the basic communication services that most of us take for granted, like the ability to call 911. The provisions of H.R. 4884 would gut the Lifeline program by setting a cap, forcing a rapid phase-out of voice services, and preventing the subsidy from being used toward equipment like handsets. Each of these provisions alone would be bad enough. However, taken together, these provisions will rip phones out of the hands of millions of Americans. If Republicans truly want to control the costs in the Lifeline program, their blunt force bill is the wrong approach. There's a better way. Let us work together to address inequality, to improve the economy, to find more people jobs, and the best way to lower the cost of the program is to lift people up, not to take away their connection to a better life. I look forward to today's discussion, and I yield the remainder of my time to Mr. McNerney.
I thank the ranking member. I want to talk about the Lifeline program. For over 30 years, millions of low-income Americans have been able to access phone service strictly because of the Lifeline program. Families that are Lifeline eligible are low income. That means for a family of four, an income of $32,800 a year. So for these people, the current subsidy is $9.25 a month, and that's just for the phone section. H.R. 4884 will limit the number of families that are eligible for this program. And for these families, the Lifeline program makes an enormous difference. It allows Americans to apply for jobs. It allows seniors to manage health care. It allows loved ones to stay connected. And it gives families and individuals access to 911. Mandating a cap on Lifeline program, eliminating standalone mobile service, and prohibiting funds from being used for devices that would have a devastating impact on families of low-income Americans. A better way to control costs of the Lifeline program is to lift people up out of poverty. Let's work together to close the wage gap, increase the minimum wage, and start infrastructure projects that'll put these folks to work. So I think there's a much better way to go about this than capping a very critical program like Lifeline, and I yield back to the ranking member.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Before I turn to our witnesses, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following documents: a written statement from State Senator Greg Smith on the Kelsey Smith Act, a letter from Representative Gomert supporting Kerry's Law, a letter from FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai supporting Kerry's Law, a letter from the Good Samaritan Society supporting H.R. 4111, and letters supporting H.R. 4884, the Curb Lifeline Act from Taxpayer Protection Alliance, 60 Plus Alliance, and Frontiers of Freedom. Without objection, those will also go into the record. We are now prepared to turn to our extraordinary panel of witnesses. And again, we appreciate very much your being here. We look forward to all of your comments. As a precursor, you have to push a little button on the base of that microphone, and you have to pull it fairly close for us all to hear it. And so we're going to start with Mr. Hank Hunt, father of Kerry Hunt. Mr. Hunt, thank you again for being here. We're sorry for the tragedy that's befallen your family. We look forward to your testimony.
Well, thank you. I hope I pushed that hard enough.
Perfectly done.
Good morning. I want to thank the committee for inviting me here and having us here for our testimony. As Chairman said, on December the 1st, 2013, I lost my oldest daughter to a vicious murder. She was stabbed to death by her husband with their children present. This is a little over 2 years ago, and I still ask that if I stumble, understand, and if I hesitate, just bear with me. As this attack began, her 9-year-old daughter did what she was taught to do. She grabbed the phone and she called 911. It didn't work. She said she heard static. She tried again. It was nothing. She tried again and again, 4 times in total, nothing. When I arrived at the police station, hour or so after the event happened, my granddaughter sat on my lap and with a very defiant expression looked at me and she said, "I tried, but it wouldn't work, Papa." It was then I realized this had happened at a hotel. And this hotel requires an extra digit for an outside line, and they utilize a multi-line telephone system, MLTS. And after I laid my daughter to rest, I became determined that that was going to stop. Wasn't sure how to do it, but figured I'd just take it as it came. We don't teach our children to dial an access number. It isn't always the number 9 either. Some hotels, motels, office buildings utilize the number 7 or the number 8. Even more confusing, I stayed at a hotel in Waco, Texas that instructed its guests on the face of the phone to call 6821 in case of an emergency. I don't know who answers that. I didn't try it. I wasn't brave enough. I am now. I will test 911 at any hotel I go to, and the one I'm staying at now, you cannot call 911. I started a change.org petition. That's all I knew to do. And I, as naive as I guess I am at my age, I was wanting to get 100 signatures. And I was going to march into my congressman's office with 100 signatures and create a law. On my way here, I checked that petition again, and we're at 550,000 almost. We're closing in on that. That, I believe, was the magic number, because here I am. And I'm being one that can be nervous a lot. When I approached my congressman about it, finally got an invitation, I was surprised to be welcomed. And the interest that has been taken into this issue has been overwhelming and very pleasing. Kerry's Law seeks 3 things: direct dialing of any phone, anywhere, anytime, without a prefix, postfix number being required for a call to be connected. On-site notification, having a central point where all calls made to 911 from any phone on any particular MLTS will also alert someone on that site that a 911 call has been placed. And number 3, no interference or redirection of a 911 call. Some hotels, when you dial 911, it directs it to the front desk. That front desk clerk will answer that 911 call and then decide whether or not it should be taken further to a local PSAP, a public safety answering point. It's very simple procedure, which I have found. Very little to no cost to implement, since almost, if not all, MLTS systems are already capable of being programmed to do so. In the majority of cases, it's simply a reprogram by keyboard. I've learned a lot in the past 864 days since my daughter passed away. People want this law. People will be greedy and may try to make a buck off of it. It needs to be done. It needs to be taken care of. It's been said the telecom industry will police itself without any laws or regulations requiring it to do so. Over the past 10 years, they've been policing themselves. Problems still exist. Red lights and stop signs do not save lives. It's the actions of the driver who is obeying the law. Laws are created when ethics fail, and if that's what's required, then so be it. I want to thank Avaya Corporation, Conveyance Systems, Verizon Corporation, National Emergency Number Association, and several other companies, and most of all, the 911 community, for taking the responsibility to resolve this matter. A special thanks to FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai, who, after being approached by Mark Fletcher, Chief Architect of Public Safety for Avaya Corporation, took a stance, and since his involvement, numerous hotel chains have corrected this problem on their own. I want to mention Marriott Corporation for taking the lead. They have done that, and they require it at any of their hotels, even the franchises, and on their monthly inspections, that is part of their inspection. I will say this, without the determination of Mark Fletcher, we wouldn't be here today talking about this. I knew no way of how to get this done, and he contacted me approximately a week later, and after discussion with him, we took it forward. Kerry's Law has been passed in Suffolk County, New York, Illinois, Maryland, state of Texas, and just recently the state of Tennessee, with legislation similar to Kerry's law being passed in Connecticut and Pennsylvania. In order for this to be consistent across the country, we'll seek a federal act requiring the three things that Kerry's law asks. Efficient 911 can be deployed free with Kerry's law. It's a simple act, direct access, on-site notification, no interception. If we can't do this, if it can't be done, if it seems to be impossible, then I feel that we need to remove those instructions from every police car, fire truck, and ambulance in our country. I appreciate the time you've allowed me here, and I will entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. We appreciate your testimony, and your passion on this issue is very understood. We'll now go to Miss Melissa Missy Smith, Treasurer of the Kelsey Smith Foundation and mother of Kelsey Smith. Ms. Smith, thank you for being here today. We're sorry for the tragedy your family's endured as well. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Walden. I'd like to thank you and the other members for inviting me to come and speak today. And I'd like to thank Congressman Yoder, Emmanuel Cleaver, Representative Pompeo, and Representative Lynn for sponsoring this. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank former Congressman T. Hart and Moore, who started this process when Kelsey was murdered. Kelsey Smith, she is the reason this legislation began in Kansas 7 years ago, and to date has passed in 22 states. I am the mother of Kelsey Smith. Her story made national and international news when she was kidnapped in broad daylight from a Target store just 9 days after graduating from high school. What does a parent go through when a child is missing? You do not eat because you don't know if your child is eating. You do not sleep because you don't know if your child is sleeping. What took so long to find Kelsey? One word: Verizon. Let me be perfectly clear. In no way do we hold them responsible for Kelsey's death. They had nothing to do with that. What is this law and why is it needed? Federal law states that providers may release the location information. This law states they shall. We spend a lot of time, money, and resources training our police. We do not spend that same time, money, and resources training a customer service rep to answer a call at 2 o'clock in the morning as to what a life emergency is. What about privacy? We're not asking for the call information. We're just asking, where is that device? I don't care who you're texting. I don't care the numbers you're calling. I don't care what pictures you're taking. Where is that device? Once that information was released, within 45 minutes, Kelsey's body was found. What about police misconduct? We hear about that also. There has not been one instance of a reported case of police misusing this law. Does it work? Yes, it does. In Kansas, a suicide was prevented when a child left a note for their parents, and they traced her phone and found her in time. An elderly stroke victim was found in time. That wasn't a way we had anticipated Kelsey's law being used, but he could only call his wife, and they were able to find him and get him the medical attention he needed in time. And then last year, and this one makes me tear up, there was a baby found in 40 minutes. That baby was found alive. It had been carjacked because my baby wasn't found alive. Much legislation is about numbers, so let me give you some. 355.4 million wireless subscribers in the United States in December 2014. That is from the CTIA summary report. 47% of U.S. households in 2014 were wireless only. 2 of our daughters don't have a landline. 4,176. That's the number of 17 to 24-year-olds murdered in the United States in 2007. $20,000, that's what it cost us to bury Kelsey. 125 is the number of detectives involved in her case, 18 different law enforcement agencies, including the federal, county, and city agencies, multiple municipalities, 2 states, all tied up for 4 days. How much money and resources were spent on that? of which I'm very thankful because my daughter came home. 45 minutes. That is how long it took to locate Kelsey once that engineer got to the tower. 1, Kelsey, the reason this legislation began in 2009. 0, that's the cost of implementing this law. It doesn't cost anything. There are not many times a legislator can pass a law, save a life, and it doesn't cost you. Priceless, the value of the lives saved using the Kelsey Smith Act. You know, when this law passed in Kansas, I said to Senator Rob Olson at the time, he was the original sponsor that helped me with this, that maybe my baby laid out there for 4 days because God knew her mother had the mouth to get this done. And according to C.S. Lewis, I'll end with this: experience, that most brutal of teachers, but you learn. My God, do you learn? Please learn from our experience. Thank you, and I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. We'll now turn to Mr. Steve Souter, the Director of the Fairfax County, Virginia 911 Center. Mr. Souter, thank you for being here. We look forward to your comments. You'll need to, yeah.
Good morning, and Chairman Walden and Ranking Member Eskew and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to speak at today's hearing. My name is Steve Souter, and I am the Director of the Fairfax County Department of Public Safety Communications, a community in which some members of this committee may reside. Over the course of the more than 50 years in 911 public safety communications, I have served in 4 public safety communication centers in the National Capital Region and have been fortunate to be the director of 3. I have also been fortunate to participate in the national efforts to improve public safety communications, most recently as chair of the Federal Communications Commission Task Force on Optimal PSAP Architecture, which addressed important issues for the 911 community, such as, but not limited to, cybersecurity, technical architecture in today's century, and of course, the ever-prevalent funding. I am honored to be here today to discuss the important legislation affecting public safety communications before this subcommittee and to answer any questions that you may have. My remarks will focus on H.R. 4167, Kerry's Law. We just heard Mr. Hank speak about this issue, and I was welled with emotion as I heard him describe his ordeal. 911 has earned the public's trust as the go-to number when there is something wrong. Simply 911. We all know it. It is, as others have said, on the side of every fire truck and police car, and the front page of every phone book in the United States of America. It does not say that in order to make a 911 call, you have to use any kind of code, prefix, or subtext. It's not required. 911, the most recognized number in the United States of America, the number that all of us would go to if anything happened in our home communities, and a number which is called 240 million times a year. 240 million times a year. No matter where you are, when you expect and can call 911, it will work. That is the expectation. That was the expectation of Brianna when she called on behalf of her mother, that it would work. And that is why when she sat on her grandfather's lap and said, "Daddy" or "Granddad," it didn't work. That should not be the fate of any other person ever again. Many of you are familiar with the tragic story of Kerry Hunt. Kerry was assaulted by her ex-husband in a small hotel in Marshall, Texas in 2013. Her 9-year-old daughter, Brianne, did exactly what she had been taught to do. She called 911. But because the hotel's phone system required a prefix to make outside calls, her repeated attempts to get help never went through. This is a situation that exists across the country, where multiple line telephone systems are employed, including in hotels, colleges, corporate campuses, and indeed, government buildings. I commend and appreciate Hank Hunt's efforts in this regard, and I'd like to also recognize FCC Commissioner Pai, who has been mentioned previously, for joining with him, Mr. Hunt, to advocate the hotel industry and the mobile line telephone system manufacturers to make the changes required to enable direct dial to 911. Indeed, Commissioner Pai has reported that many national hotel chains have already changed their multiple line telephone systems to enable direct access to 911, including their owned and their franchised properties. This shows that it is possible to do so very easily and virtually without any cost. Kerry's law, introduced by Representative Gohmert, has bipartisan support and would be an important step in addressing this problem by requiring that all new multiple line telephone systems be configured by default to directly dial 911 without requiring any additional digit, code, or prefix. This would be a substantial improvement for 911 calls from MLTS systems, and it's also an opportunity to address important issues such as the delivery of accurate location information. When those 240 million 911 calls are made annually, they're answered by a 911 call taker dispatcher that sits at a console in one of America's 6,100 911 centers. And as that call taker answers that 911 call, the very first question that they ask is, where is your emergency? They don't ask what, they don't ask why, and they don't ask how. They ask where, because the location of the emergency is absolutely the single most important piece of information the call taker has to acquire. In addition to direct 911 access, MLTS phones traditionally lack another key feature: accurate information location. Example, before this meeting, I walked down the hallway and there was an office door opened, and I asked the attendant there if I could use their phone. I had my uniform on. She said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'd like to call 911. She said, "Okay," and I dialed 911, and I got the very efficient U.S. Capitol Police. I also dialed 911, and I got the Capitol Police. I thanked her very much. When I asked the Capitol Police operator that had answered if they knew where this phone call was coming from, they said they knew the telephone number, meaning that I was calling from, but they'd have to reference another list to identify in what office that telephone number terminated. I walked into the hallway. I then used my own cell phone, and I dialed 911. It was answered by the Metropolitan Police Department's 911 center, not far from where we sit today. I asked the gentleman that answered that call what location it showed that I was calling from. He said, number 50, Independence Avenue, Southwest. That is the location that we are at today. The Rayburn House Office Building stretches for 2 city blocks. It is at least 4 floors above ground and 2 floors below ground. And I asked, was there any indication on what we commonly call in the business the ante or the alley screen as to where at number 50 Independence Avenue I was located? And he said, no, sir. If I were having a heart attack or someone was having a heart attack and I called on their behalf, can you imagine the challenge that would exist in trying to locate one person in this building that is this large, that provides no more accurate information than simply the address? This leaves the public in danger and public safety answering points, PSAPs, the first responders, expending significant resources to locate and provide emergency assistance to the scene. In order to ensure that every caller gets the help they need, every multiple line telephone system should transmit a dispatchable address where the call is actually coming from, such as the room number, the office number, so that responders can quickly locate the calling party. Additionally, while the bill eventually makes direct dial the default for all new multiple line telephone systems, there would still be a large number of embedded base of telephones that wouldn't support 911 dialing by default. Depending upon equipment cycles, these systems may not be replaced for many years to come, allowing continued consumer confusion and most tragically delayed response. Whether a person can direct dial 911 should not depend upon where he or she is located, such as a hotel room or a dormitory, or how old the telephone is that they're calling from. Kerry's Law is a great first step and will be hopefully lead to additional efforts to fully solve the 911 problems associated with multiple line telephone systems. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the subcommittee, for your work to improve public safety communications. I'd especially like to thank Representative Eshoo as one of the 4 founding members of the Next Generation Congressional 911 Caucus. And I'd also take the privilege of asking Mr. Pallone, I see that he's now left the dais, from my home state of New Jersey, because he referenced a very important week in the 911 world, and that is this week, National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week, the week that is set aside by the Congress and signed by the President to recognize those most unsung heroes in our profession, the 911 call takers and dispatchers that serve the community and the citizens that you men and women represent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your testimony. That may also be a reason we're having all these bills up today, so thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Wessler. Nathan Wessler is the staff attorney for the ACLU Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. Mr. Wessler, welcome. We look forward to your comments on these pieces of legislation, and please go ahead, sir.
Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the ACLU concerning H.R. 4889. Although we agree with the important goals of this legislation, we oppose it in its current form because it lacks sufficient safeguards against abuse. The tragedy that gave rise to this legislation today is truly, truly terrible. In emergencies, where the safety of a person is in imminent jeopardy, we all want to ensure that law enforcement can quickly access cell phone location information to avoid this kind of a tragic outcome. Allowing companies the discretion to provide these records in an emergency is an effective mechanism for ensuring access while preventing the abuse that could jeopardize the safety of others. In 2015, just 2 service providers alone, AT&T and Verizon, processed more than 81,000 emergency requests for information. These and the other service providers maintain large law enforcement compliance teams that operate around the clock, responding to requests at any hour in order to help avoid tragedies like the one that gave rise to this bill. This process has been refined and improved in recent years. The same features of cell phone location information that make it useful to law enforcement, the ability to track people's movements over time and to precisely pinpoint their locations, also trigger the protections of the Fourth Amendment. As the Supreme Court has recognized and lower courts have reaffirmed, government access to cell phone location information can invade reasonable expectations of privacy by laying bare some of the most sensitive aspects of our lives, when we are at home, where we spend the night, which doctors or psychiatrists we visit, and more. For that reason, any legislation allowing law enforcement access to location records in an emergency must include strong protections. Those protections are important to prevent false invocations of emergencies by police who want to avoid obtaining a court order or a warrant in a normal criminal investigation. Our written testimony includes examples of such abuse, including cases where police obtained unfettered access to cell phone location information, but later admitted under oath that no emergency actually existed, and a case where police in California reportedly coerced a kidnapping victim into saying that she had been, coerced a person into saying she had been kidnapped falsely, and then sent a false emergency request for location information to the purported kidnapper's cellular service provider. Law enforcement agencies, including the Department of Justice and the Reno, Nevada Police Department, have themselves admitted to issuing emergency requests where no emergency in fact existed. Protections will also empower service providers to turn away requests from criminals and stalkers who attempt to impersonate law enforcement. Effective privacy safeguards can coexist with speedy emergency request procedures, without interfering with law enforcement's important job of protecting the public. The ACLU has 3 recommendations for the committee. First, the committee should preserve a system where service providers have discretion to turn down a warrantless request when it appears the emergency is false, or when the requester does not appear to actually be a law enforcement official. Making disclosure mandatory can facilitate abuse by removing this important safety valve. Second, if the committee moves forward with a mandatory disclosure requirement, it should add protections. Law enforcement should be required to obtain after-the-fact approval from a judge so that there's a neutral decision maker, ensuring that the claimed emergency is genuine. In cases where police are found to have violated the law, there should be remedies, including suppression of illegally obtained evidence and a civil remedy for those affected. And law enforcement should be required to provide notice to the person whose location information was obtained in order to allow that person to seek redress if police violated the law, or to learn if someone may have impersonated an officer illegally to obtain sensitive information. These protections are modest. They're well established in other statutes, including the Wiretap Act, the Pen Register Statute, the USA Freedom Act, which governs certain requests for information in national security investigations, and state laws dealing with cell phone location records in places like Indiana, California, and Colorado. The version of the Kelsey Smith Act introduced in the last Congress also included some of these protections. Finally, the current bill allows emergency requests when law enforcement have a reasonable belief that there's an emergency. This standard should be raised to probable cause, which is the standard that was used in the version of this legislation in the last Congress. A probable cause standard will help ensure that sensitive location records are obtained only when there is a good reason to believe an emergency exists. I look forward to answering any questions and to working with the committee to ensure access to location records in emergencies while simultaneously safeguarding Americans' privacy and preventing abuse. Thank you.
Mr. Wessler, we appreciate your input on this issue as well. We'll now turn to Ms. Abigail Medina, trustee of the San Bernardino City Unified School District. Good morning, welcome, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Issue, and committee members. My name is Abigail Medina. I am a mother of 5 children, 2 of whom are in college, a wife of over 20 years, and currently Vice President of the San Bernardino City Unified School District Board of Education. I am here to express the value of Lifeline to the many families it helps, especially in my community of the city of San Bernardino, in which it's endured bankruptcy, poverty, and most recently the December 2nd mass killings. As a resident of San Bernardino, my family too struggled financially. When my husband was laid off, I worked in the fields Monday through Friday, leaving my family behind in order to help reconnect our electricity bill. Every penny counted. I remember searching through our furniture for the cent that would complete $1. My husband heard about Lifeline from a family friend who saw our struggles. You see, having affordable utility services helped us keep afloat. And while we worked to improve our situation, having phone service also helped us when my husband would receive a call for a job. And also an emergency, especially since we had children at home, we could make that call. These seem like little things, and many people don't realize how important these services are until we have none. These days, many need the internet to look for work. Children need to do research online for homework assignments. Many of our families are experiencing the widening technology and homework and access gaps. 64% of all Americans believe that expanding broadband access should be a national priority. And the FCC's recent Lifeline decision will help expand access in low-income communities. Lifeline internet services will allow many families to better their situation. In fact, research shows that the expanding internet access helps to grow the gross domestic product and personal incomes, that children would have a better and greater educational opportunity, especially to do homework assigned on the internet, that many, but not all children today can complete. and that teens and others would have a greater opportunity to get health care advice online and save money on expenses. And I also want to mention that college students are also struggling, because if my children who are in college, if they have their internet disconnected or they're cut off, they have no access to do their homework assignments, which many are online. So I ask you today to think of the many families, especially families in San Bernardino, the city of San Bernardino, and the many communities throughout the nation who need help to find a way to succeed. I stand before you to oppose capping the Lifeline program so that no eligible family is turned away from this important necessity. Thank you.
We appreciate your input on the legislation. Thank you for being here. We'll now go to Ms. Katie McAuliffe, who's the Federal Affairs Manager for Americans for Tax Reform and Executive Director of Digital Liberty. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Please proceed.
Thank you. Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on behalf of all taxpayers, or in this situation, ratepayers. My name is Katie McAuliffe, Federal Affairs Manager at Americans for Tax Reform. Americans for Tax Reform advocates on behalf of taxpayers for a system in which taxes are simpler, flatter, and more visible and lower than they are today. I am happy to lend a voice of support for H.R. 4884, controlling the unchecked and reckless ballooning of Lifeline Act of 2016, also known as Curb Lifeline Act of 2016. This legislation provides the necessary safeguards to enhance methods for stopping waste, fraud, and abuse, while also ensuring those most in need of Lifeline receive support as intended. It also protects ratepayers from footing the bill on waste, fraud, and abuse. Before delving into the Curb Act, I wanted to congratulate you and all of Congress on passing the Permanent Internet Tax Freedom Act. This is a great way to encourage internet access for consumers by also keeping costs low. The fees for the Universal Service Fund, of which Lifeline is a part, will still be included as a line item on ratepayers' bills. However, permanent internet tax freedom does not stop fees from being assessed on bills, on voice and data service at this point. The fees of the Universal Fund will still be included as a line item on ratepayers' bills. Lifeline is part of the Universal Service Fund that has long been in need of reform. It was established in 1985 in the form of a fixed dollar subsidy to the carriers for eligible low-income subscribers for Americans to afford basic phone service. In 2012, spending hit an all-time high, and the Federal Communications Commission moved to target rampant waste, fraud, and abuse, with a $400 million spending decrease between 2012 and 2013 alone. The FCC has shown it is capable of controlling its budget. Spending in the Lifeline program is set to drop a total of $670 million by the end of this year, with spending dropping from $2.2 billion to $1.5 billion. The FCC recently voted to expand the Lifeline subsidy to cover broadband as well as voice service. As we saw, when a new service is added, spending goes up, not necessarily because of need or increased availability, but more likely because of fraud and abuse. In its new order, the FCC reestablished the $9.25 subsidy to carriers to use for Lifeline-eligible subscribers and set the quality standard for broadband at 3G with 500 megabytes data for wireless and speeds of 1 up and 1 down. It creates a new verification process for the eligible applicants and sets a budget of $2.5 billion that can be reevaluated should spending hit 90% of the $2.5 billion fund. While I will agree that the expanding of the verification process, the FCC will do a better job of targeting fraud and abuse, unless the third-party verifier incurs waste on its own, the order does not do all it can. A powerful tool for controlling waste and fraud is to set a hard budget. While Americans for Tax Reform would prefer there were no subsidies lashed to ratepayers, that is not the option before us today. When faced with no budget or a $1.5 billion cap as proposed in H.R. 4884, Congress has the authority and the responsibility to set a firm cap. All other programs under the Universal Service Fund do have budget caps. I would like to suggest that the $1.5 billion cap is solid legislation on 2 points. $1.5 billion is an ample budget, and the budget is necessary to control waste, fraud, and abuse. So in closing the affordability gap, although preferences aside, Americans for Tax Reform strongly supports a budget cap on the Lifeline Fund, especially in the current environment. The stated goal for including broadband as part of the subsidy is to bridge the digital divide and close the broadband affordability gap. While perhaps broadband may become more affordable for some, the order does not focus on those who need access the most, those who have no broadband access at all. In 2014, the NTIA found that 48% of non-adopting households cited lack of need or lack of interest as a reason for not subscribing to broadband at home. The Pew Charitable Trust found in 2015 that 70% of non-adopters were uninterested in subscribing to broadband in the future. Many smartphone-only users say that the reason they do not have broadband at home is because the smartphone lets them do all that they need to do online. Underscoring the device's utility with a home high-speed subscription, and 59% say that its utility for those without a home high-speed subscription, and 59% say they have other options for internet access outside the home. Another survey conducted jointly by the FCC and Connected Nation found that 37% of non-subscribers were willing to adopt broadband at a reasonable price. The remaining 68% of non-subscribing households cited non-price associated reasons. Among the 37% willing households, price as an adoption factor was highest for those making below $15,000, that was about 50%, and upon reaching the $35,000 marker for a family of four, 32% cited cost as the primary factor as a non-subscriber. So cost can be interpreted in different ways depending on how a question is asked, but more so in terms of what else is available. I don't believe this hypothesis has been tested, but it is possible that those who cite cost as the primary reason for not subscribing may actually mean they don't see the point in spending that cost at home when broadband is so readily available elsewhere. In America, we're fortunate that broadband availability via wireline or wireless covers 99% of the population with an 88% in-home adoption rate. We used to go to internet cafes and pay by the minute to get online. Then there were hotspots or private wireless networks, and there was usually a cost. Now access is freely available everywhere. If not at a local coffee shop, restaurant, or McDonald's, there's access in public libraries and schools. This leads us to a position where monetary cost has significantly decreased as the prominent deterrent from having access at home for non-subscribers. Even as early as 2013, consumers demonstrated the cost factor was decreasing as a barrier to connecting the unconnected. In 2013, the FCC's 14 experimental broadband lifeline offerings, wireline and wireless broadband providers signed up less than 10% of the predicted number of new subscribers. This, the only real-world experiment with Lifeline applied to broadband, showed it is exceedingly difficult to encourage the disconnected to subscribe via discounts. To participate in the pilot, subscribers had to certify they met income requirements and had not had a broadband subscription for at least 6 months. For one carrier, just over half of the applicants were rejected because they had had broadband sometime within the previous 6 months. If the goal is connecting the disconnected to reduce the digital divide, then the subsidies applied to broadband were not as effective as expected and shown in this experiment. From this data, it is likely that subsidies given based on income criteria will mostly go to those who already subscribe to broadband rather than connecting the disconnected. In his paper, Learning from the FCC's Lifeline Broadband Project, Scott Walden concluded, if this is the case, then the Universal Service Fund becomes an inefficient general welfare fund rather than a mechanism that encourages connectivity. In controlling waste, fraud, and abuse, the Lifeline program has a long history of abuse. Congress should use its oversight to rein in spending and encourage abuse that encourages abuse on the backs of ratepayers. A budget of $2.25 billion that can be reevaluated when 90% of the fund has already been spent does not adequately provide the proper incentives to stop abuse. The Federal Communications Commission has taken measures to stop rampant abuse in the program. The Lifeline annual recertification process established in 2012 Lifeline Reform Order to verify that a subsidy recipient did meet the Lifeline requirements and households were not receiving multiple subsidies significantly cut spending in the program. As a result, 29% of all 2012 Lifeline subscribers were de-enrolled, and between 2012 and 2013, waste, fraud, and abuse of the program was cut by nearly $400 million. As a whole, since 2012, abuse has been cut by nearly $670 million, and spending of the fund reduced from $2.2 billion to about $1.5 billion. As broadband is included, the National Eligibility Verifier adds another layer of abuse protection, though I cannot speculate as to whether this entity will incur more government waste. Another reason a budget cap is important is not only to curb carrier abuse, but also to prevent government waste of dollars that should be directed towards helping those in need. This shows promise, and the Commission, under Congress's direction, should not stop there. While there are penalties, both monetary and otherwise, they serve as only a mild deterrent. Importantly, the ones actually defrauded, the ratepayers, do not receive restitution. Setting an actual budget that must be adhered to is key to protecting ratepayers while still providing support to those in need of access.
Ms.
There's-
McAuliffe?
Yes.
Are you about finished? I've let you go an extra 5 minutes.
Oh, I'm about done.
10 minutes.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
supposed to
then
be 5
we'll
minutes.
just stop
so-
right there. Yeah, we'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I gave everybody a little flexibility today, but we were doubling down, so no problem. I want to start with the questions, and Ms. Smith, Mr. Wessler had some comments from the ACLU about potential abuse and all, and I'd like to get your take and Mr. Souter's take on that. What do you think? What have you seen in states? I was going to inquire in my own state of Oregon if they've seen any abuse. And aren't there other statutes that would govern a fraudulent claim of emergency when none existed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have not heard of any reports. I did read his examples, but if a law enforcement officer is going to commit a fraudulent claim, I do believe we have laws that already address that, and they could be prosecuted. My husband was a police officer for almost 20 years and was a police officer when Kelsey went missing. And does it happen? Sure. But the same can be said about cell phone providers not releasing that information.
Mr. Souter, what's your experience in this realm?
Thank you for the question. Personally, and the folks that I work with around the National Capital Region where we all live, we do not see any abuse of that at all. It is used very judiciously and only where it's absolutely incredibly important that it be used. And there are ample situations where by it being used for the right reason at the right time, many lives have been saved or have been saved from being more injured than they had already been. Yeah.
Mr. Wessler, I have a question for you. On the Oregon statute, since it passed unanimously, the House, the Senate, and signed by a Democratic governor, what was ACLU's position on that?
I'm sorry, Congressman, I don't know that. Each of our state affiliates handle state legislation separately. I work for our national office.
Could you find out for me?
I can.
I should,
Be
I'm
happy
not
to.
an attorney. I know better, though, than to ask a question I don't know the answer to.
Absolutely. And Congressman, if I could just say quickly
Sure.
that there have been a variety of protections put into place in different versions of the Kelsey Smith Act enacted by states around the country. In states like Indiana and Colorado, for example, there are requirements for after-the-fact judicial review, probable cause requirements. In California, comprehensive cell phone privacy bill had similar protections.
So, Mr. Souter, can you speak to the after-the-fact judicial review and what that effect would have on a 911 dispatcher or your system?
As someone mentioned earlier, you may only call 911 once in your life, but it's the most important phone call you may make.
That was one of the Democrat members of the FCC.
I think that is the foundation from which we really look at the whole industry of 911 and the delivery of service. Providing help to those that need it in the quickest, most efficient way is absolutely the most important thing. I can't imagine how awkward our job would be if restrictions were placed on it greater than those that are on it already. It would clearly distract for the entire intent of 911.
Okay. Ms. Smith, anything you want to finish up with?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we have protocols and that in place, that the police would have to verify that they are the police. And it's not like a police officer can just call up and say to Verizon, hey, give me this information. There are steps that have to be taken, and there are protocols. And I just find it somewhat amusing that the ACLU has said, we don't want this mandated, but yet in his testimony, there are several mandates that he would like put in place. You can't really have it both ways.
All right. In the essence of time, I'm going to end my questioning and now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshu, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to each one of the witnesses, thank you for your testimony. Moving, instructive, helpful, and, well, that's a lot, because that's what a hearing is for. Mr. Souter, thank you for your wonderful work. It's been part of the joy of my public service to have become involved with all of the first responders across our country. So thank you for what you've done to advance that collective work. I think that we all agree with it when you dial 911 from a hotel, an office, anywhere, that you shouldn't have to have some kind of prefix. I mean, I never taught my children any prefix. It was just, what did mommy tell you? Tell me the number again, say it again from their earliest consciousness. And we all embrace this. Now, location accuracy for our systems is very, very important, because once you reach a 911 call center, the people answering the phones have to know where you are to dispatch first responders. I think it's the other bookend, no prefix and location. And I think that if one is missing, then the other really has it has an overall effect on the emergency. And the reason why I ask this is because Carey's Law is obviously very important. It's born out of tragedy, which is instructive to us. But I'm concerned that it doesn't speak to location technology. Do you have the same unsettled sensibility as I do on this?
Ms. Smith, would you like to say anything? Because I'd like to follow on you if you don't mind.
The reason it's not included in Carey's Law is because of the expense. In order to have a dispatchable phone number, you have to have one for every phone in every building that will tell you the room number, the floor number, and as such. Whereas those phone numbers aren't bought, they are leased. They are a monthly recurring charge per phone. Mm-hmm. This is a cost that's unnecessary with on-site notification.
Well, let me ask you, do you think the cost matches the urgency of the tragedies that we have, that you are living through and others are living through? I mean, where do you cut off cost? Do you say to some people, there's a cost attached, so sorry about you, but I just think it's part of the emergency system. So.
When a building has 5,000 phones in it and each one has to pay an extra $2 per phone a month, that can put a company under. On-site notification, had my daughter experienced on-site notification, someone from that hotel would have known that call was made and had gone to that room. We would hope. Therefore, this gentleman told the courts that it took him 5 minutes to kill my daughter.
Let me get back to, if I might, I only have 5 minutes, not 10. I want to get back to Mr. Souter. Does it concern you that that Carey's Law requires that these problems be fixed on only new phone systems purchased 2 years after enactment?
Very personally, I want to be sure that we're looking at this in the context of the provisions of the Carey proposed law, as well as the broader implications of location technology when it comes
But
to.
what's your opinion of it? I'm just
My
asking.
opinion very definitely is that Kerry's law is very well written, but it has to be tied with the location that the call is coming from. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's an important thing to get on the record. Ms. McCullough, did you write your own testimony? It seemed like you weren't sure about what you were reading.
Oh, no, I wrote my own
You
testimony.
wrote it, okay. Do you think that the budget cap can lead to more wasteful spending in the program? And this is the issue that I want to raise. If those that are eligible for the service but don't need it, then decide to apply for the subsidy out of fear that the service is going to run out of money, what kind of an effect do you think that's going to have?
So are you referencing something kind of similar to when?
No, it's just a straightforward question. I mean, if you can't answer it, I'll go to someone else because I don't have.
No, I don't think that would be an issue.
Why? Based on what?
I don't think it would be an issue that a bunch of people would rush out and try to get the subsidy because it was capped.
Mm-hmm. And that's a sensibility of yours? I mean, have you done any
Yes.
research on it?
No, I have not.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much again to our witnesses, especially the family members, for providing your testimony today, because I know how difficult it is for you to have to give it to us today. But it's very important that we hear your stories, so those stories aren't repeated by other families across our country. And also, Mr. Souter, I'd like to thank you, for, what you did a little bit earlier before you came into to our hearing room about, making 911 calls from here, because I've heard that, problem before that, it's not very easily, especially in a building this size, to find out where someone is, and appreciate that. But, Mr. Hunt, if I could maybe ask you a question in regards to, encouraging the fact, that especially from the MLTS vendors, is that every single one of their phone systems can be configured to allow for that dialing of that 911. And moreover, the reprogramming system for the phone's not set up for dialing, or not set up for direct dialing from the factory is relatively easy and inexpensive. In other words, there's no technical reason why every phone in the U.S. cannot be set up to allow for that direct 911 dialing. Despite this, there are, again, as we've heard in the testimony today, there are thousands of hotels, schools, and office buildings across the country that do not have that direct dial program into their MLTS systems. What else could we be doing out there besides when we're looking at the law or the bill before us to incentivize institutions to adopt that direct 911 dialing?
Well, I think that the biggest fear that some companies have right now is liability. In some cases, they can be held liable for not providing a proper atmosphere. People, as we've said earlier, 911 is ingrained in our children and even in adults. And when that is an expected result that you should get by dialing those numbers. When a phone prevents you from doing that, you have no idea which direction to take it in. And therefore, you have immediate danger to life. At this point right now, most companies will do it on their own. We've been having very good luck with the hotels and motels that are doing that, as I said earlier. And
Can I interrupt for 1 second? Now, how did you reach out to the different hotels and maybe the other providers out there?
We have the
them to do
backing of the
this?
American Hotel and Lodging Association. And once Commissioner Pye released his questionnaire to the top 10 CEOs of the hotel corporations, word spread quite a bit. The industry itself seems to be taking a proactive role in it. But that's hotels and motels. We're talking about colleges, schools, office buildings. Mm-hmm. And in reference to being able to locate a person, You can have all the information in the world, but if that firefighter doesn't know where that room is, it does him no good. Having someone, when we got here today, even though we had a map on the wall and the room number, we had no idea. We had to ask someone. Someone pointed it out, and it ended up being fairly easy to find. But the numbers, in some cases, numbers that are in between two others are in this direction, and then the opposite numbers are this way, and they should be next to each other in my brain. But it was difficult to find without asking someone. And on-site notification, in our opinion, is a solution to that. If you don't have on-site notification, the room is locked, what are they going to do? Break the door down? If it's a dire situation, then I can understand that. But if it's even a missed dial, you can have someone come and unlock the door for you, unlock the front door if it's after hours. They can get you there, but once the firefighters or police officers or ambulance gets to that location, they need someone to direct them quickly without having to go through a map or a directory. Cubicle 2C3F could be an exact location, but that would probably mean nothing to a firefighter who's trying to get to someone who's injured.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I see my time's about to expire. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Before I recognize Mr. Yarmouth, I think next I have a letter I'd like to enter into the record with unanimous consent from Commissioners Mike O'Reilly and Ajit Pai, which I think the minority has seen without objection. Now I would like to recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Yarmouth, for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses, particularly Mr. Hunt and Ms. Smith. Thank you for your courage in coming here today. I join my colleagues in expressing my sorrow for your loss, and thank you for your dedication to improving this situation and heading off any potential incident like occurred to you. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about Lifeline because I'm very concerned about any legislation that would reduce access to what in my district, and I know many districts across the country are very critical. My district is urban. It's Louisville, Kentucky. We don't qualify for the high cost fund or the rural health care fund under USF. Our schools and libraries use the E-rate, providing access to the internet, but once those facilities close, there's nowhere for most kids to go to complete their homework assignments or to just connect to the world, as we know is as valuable a part of education these days as what you find in school. The Kentucky Department of Education Technology Readiness Report indicates that more than 1 in 4 households with children in my district lack internet access. And I was at a school a couple years ago that a middle school, and I asked the principal that because 95% of the kids were on free and reduced lunch, and I asked her, what would you estimate the percentage of your kids who have access to the internet at home? She said 10%. I said, well, that 90%, those kids are done. I mean, they're lost. And the thing about that particular situation is most of the kids at that school were bused miles and miles away, some as many as 8 or 9 miles. So and I'm going to get to a question from Ms. McAuliffe, because this notion that there are other places for students to go or for families to go, including McDonald's, seems a little bit cavalier to me. I mean, how many blocks would you say it would be okay to have a 2nd or 3rd grader walk to get their homework done so they could find a McDonald's, or in case a library was open? I mean, and what are the parents going to take them, and are the McDonald's going to welcome them? And because they're not going to be able to afford to buy anything there. I mean, it just seems to me just such a cold-hearted approach to saying that these kids, I see these kids in our schools every day, and I know that there are no alternatives for them that are reasonable. You take a 9 or 10-year-old kid and say, oh, the McDonald's is 10 blocks away. Go walk there at 8 o'clock at night and get your homework done. Do you think that's really a reasonable alternative for people in this country, for kids in this country?
Well, what I was referring to is the people who are completely unconnected. So and the people who have decided they will never connect ever. So for people like that, yes, they probably do go to public places. They have someplace else to access. But for people who have completely no access, I think that is what the program should be targeted to. So that 90% of students that you were talking about who don't have access at home, Lifeline should be targeted directly towards them and to those low-income families rather than serving as a subsidy for people who are already subscribing.
All right, well, I mean, you threw a lot of numbers out in your testimony. I didn't quite get that point from listening to your testimony. I am concerned also about this notion that, and I think all of us agree that we ought to do everything we can to end fraud, waste, and abuse in any government program. I mean, it's absolutely essential, and I think we as Democrats, I wrote an op-ed piece about this last week, we as Democrats ought to be the most aggressive in that, because we want to prove the government can work, that it can be effective. So we ought to be the ones who talk about that all the time. But I do have just a theoretical question about why a cap is something that promotes a reduction in fraud and abuse. Logically, there doesn't seem to be any connection. I can see from the agency standpoint, if you cut their funds, they're going to probably be more efficient, so maybe there's not as much waste. But the fraud and abuse in the system, do you have any evidence that cutting a budget actually reduces fraud and abuse?
Cutting the budget has more incentives for pursuing that, and I think combined with the National Eligibility Verifier, that those two working in concert is a great incentive to keep everything targeted to the people who need it most.
Yeah, well, the verifier is going to be in place, so we
Right.
don't have to legislate that. But, I mean, do you have any evidence that cutting a budget has reduced fraud and abuse in any particular program?
Fraud and, I would say abuse.
Okay. Well, if you could submit any evidence you have, I'd like to see that. Thanks very much. My time is up, Mr. Chairman. I thank you.
Thank the gentleman for his questions. We'll now go to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses today. Ms. Smith, thank you especially to you for coming today to talk about your daughter and all the work you've done that has been absolutely tireless. So we heard some concern expressed by one of the folks who gave testimony this morning about the possible abuses of this law. You talked about it being in 22 states. Can you tell me, how would you respond to the concerns about privacy that were raised today?
Only at the level when I testified, would there be an ACLU member trying to oppose the legislation? That's the only time we've heard about privacy issues. You won't hear it from a parent of someone that's missing.
Yeah. I also haven't heard it from law enforcement. I've talked to law enforcement throughout the state as I travel around. We've had it in Kansas now for a good long period of time. Haven't heard them. I haven't heard the senior officers expressing any concerns about their officers abusing the power and the process they have. Are you aware of any of that?
I am not.
Ms. Smith, some of the state versions have a limited liability exception for carriers, providing some protection to them. Are you comfortable with that provision, as some of the states have it, if we put that in the federal version?
I believe most of the states have it.
Mm-hmm.
Previous federal versions had that also.
Right. Mr. Wessler, thank you, Ms. Smith. Mr. Wessler, you identified in your written testimony, I think in your oral testimony as well, maybe it was just 3, but in the written testimony, 4 examples. We now have 22 states that have had this on the books for cumulatively dozens and dozens of years. Are those the 4 examples that you think provide the case for arguing against allowing cell phones geolocation data to be made available in emergency situations?
Thank you, Congressman. Those are examples that appear in case law specifically, where judges have actually had an opportunity to review police's conduct and point to that. We also point to some systemic examples, including a 2010 report by the Department of Justice Inspector General showing systemic violation of emergency request procedures by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for telephone records.
Right. That's not exactly what I've read. That's not exactly what it says. And 2 of the 4 examples, just so the record's right, 2 of the 4 examples I've now read the court cases look like they were plain old mistakes, which I will concede law enforcement makes from time to time, just like I do. So it seems to me that the case for protecting human life and finding people who are in dire need of assistance from law enforcement far outweighs what now is, by my count, one example of case law that shows some form of a potentially abusive practice over the course of years and years and years.
And Congressman, I think that points actually to the importance of one of the very modest protections we asked for, which is notice to the person whose location is obtained after the fact. Not before, obviously, not to interfere with the investigation, but notice is included in federal statutes, like in the Wiretap Act and in state statutes, and is a really key mechanism so that people can know if it was an inappropriate request. If somebody is tracked down who's truly in danger, then they will have no complaint, and we want law enforcement to have that access. But notice, after the fact judicial review, and remedies can coexist with emergency access.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back what little time I have left. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the chair recognizes 5 minutes, the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the witnesses, and particularly Mr. Hunt and Ms. Smith. Thank you so much for being here and participating. Your loss is a reminder to all of us that we need to make sure that our public safety laws are updated and modernized to account for changing technologies, and which is one of the things we on the committee take very seriously. You know, in the last session of Congress, in this committee, we passed a modified version of Kelsey's law. By voice vote, I believe. I think it passed unanimously, which provided some of the provisions that Mr. Wessler was talking about. I know as a parent, I have 4 children. I'd want that call and information to happen immediately. I think that's important. I don't quite frankly see a problem with after-the-fact review. I think that creates a disincentive, whether it be law enforcement or anyone else, from misstating or you know, who they are or what they are. I think the most important thing is when something like this happens, locate that person immediately. Nothing should stop that. But I wonder, Mr. Souter, if the action occurs immediately so that we hopefully save a life or get law enforcement to that situation as quick as possible, what harm do you see with after the fact having some sort of review to make sure that the emergency was really an emergency and that the individual whose information or location was given out is notified that that was done? And obviously, if that's someone who's missing and located, they're not going to have a problem with that. But if it was used for some other nefarious purpose, that they would know this and have some redress. Do you see a problem with that?
I do not, and internally, meaning within the 911 center and the law enforcement agencies that we work very closely with, we have a multitude of safeguards to ensure that when a request is received, there's legitimacy to it. When information is provided, it's provided in a secure manner. So all of those things internally are already in place. But you're talking after the fact.
Yeah.
I don't see any problem with it. I would only ask that the 911 center not be tasked with doing that.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think there's a solution to this. We want to do this, and we want to see it happen. And I think that as long as we're not impeding the immediate location, you know, information to where that location is, because that should be paramount before any of this other. But after the fact, to make sure that we have some safeguards in place that would be a disincentive for anyone to fraudulently say, I have an emergency here when it isn't, because there's going to be some after-the-fact review of it, seems to me to be a reasonable solution to a problem which doesn't imperil the families or the victims, and at the same time provide some safeguards against any. And I'm sure that these instances are rare anyway, but the fact that there is documentation that they have existed in some instances, this seems to be the reasonable compromise between the two. Mr. Hunt, I got to tell you, I think most people don't even give it a thought that there's prefixes before 911. I was just sitting here thinking, you know, I think all of us just thought, boy, you just grab any phone and dial 911 and you're getting connected. And you know, when you think about it, I mean, even on our phones in the Capitol, you know, if you're going an outside line, you got to hit that 9 first before you dial. And it just seems to me in this age of technology, this should be a simple fix. and that no matter what phone you touch when you hit 911, because you're right, as parents, that's what we tell our kids from the very beginning. That's the one number we drill into their heads, that, you know, when something like this happens, that's what we do. So I really hope we can address both of these problems, and I think they go hand in hand, by the way, that should be done. And I certainly, Mr. Chairman, are looking forward to working with you and members of this committee to find a solution to this very serious problem and I think it's within our ability to get this done and hopefully passed into law. So I thank both of you for coming, and Mr. Sauter, I thank you too for the great work you guys are doing, and your reputation and the work of your agency in Fairfax is well known, and we certainly appreciate it. And Mr. Wexler, I think some of the things you mentioned, especially the after the fact stuff, just to me makes sense. That's a safeguard we can instant and still make sure these families, you know, when there's a victim. I have to tell you, with regards to the Lifeline program, I know the Americans for Americans for Tax Reform, is that your group? I know you claim to speak for taxpayers. I guess you speak for some. You certainly don't speak for all. To cap this program, to especially to take away poor people's ability to call 911, because this bill you speak of has a 2-year phase-out of voice-only services. And I just wonder what happens to the people on this program in 2 years when we phase out voice-only to this. They're going to have to, you know, buy, I know this isn't favored by the industry. It's not favored by consumer groups. It's not favored by anybody I'm aware of except maybe your organization. And I would say to you, too, when you talk about the waste and fraud in this program, people immediately think, yeah, that's these poor people defrauding the program. The fraud's coming from the phone companies that are trying to sell these products, trying to sell 2 and 3 and 4 phones to people and saying it's okay, it's within the rules. I mean, most of the fraud we've seen in this Lifeline program isn't coming from the poor. It's coming from telephone solicitors that are trying to make a commission selling these products. So I think it's a terrible idea to cap the program. The FCC is working on a reform package. That phase out is 5 years instead of 2. Seems eminently reasonable to me, and I hope this committee will not pursue this legislation 4884. I think it's counterproductive. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank the entire panel, particularly Mr. Hunt and Ms. Smith, for your testimony today. I'm going to start off with the Lifeline. Ms. McAuliffe, since Florida is a net payer into the, and I represent Florida, as the chairman said, since Florida is a net payer into the Universal Service Fund, it only underscores the importance that cutting down on fraud and waste, abuse, again, within the system is imperative. We and the FCC must continue to improve and adapt the program to modernize reality so that only eligible customers receive Lifeline credits. Can you describe the effect that an uncapped budget, as currently constructed, affects payer states like Florida? And how would a firm budget at any level around $1.5 million or $2 billion better protect against waste and unbalanced Lifeline disbursement?
Sure. So in terms of a firm budget, kind of keeps things more in line with, because Florida is, what, over 300 million payee or into Lifeline. And that's money that could come back to Florida to help Florida residents who need that. So in having a budget to kind of quell this waste, fraud, and abuse, we'll make sure that the money stays more towards where it goes. And kind of in reference to the mobile only, all I am testifying here is about having a firm budget, and that is very important to have that cap.
Very good, thank you. Next question. It's apparent for you, again, Ms. McAuliffe, it's apparent that the rampant fraud and abuse within the Lifeline program 5 years ago has been addressed to some extent. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. You note that since 2012, abuse has been cut by nearly $670 million. That's significant. And yet, we see instances just last week where a company can bypass federal safeguards to enroll 99.8% of their subscribers using stolen identifications or even the lack of identification for eligibility. The ratepayers are the ones that truly suffer, in my opinion. What is the best way for us to add teeth to these eligibility requirements so that so it can act as an actual deterrent? Can we completely cut some companies out of the program at a certain level of noncompliance? Can we cut them out?
There should be, and I believe there are deterrents and abilities to cut companies' participation if they are acting in an abusive way. And I think the National Eligibility Verifier will definitely help with that, since it won't be the carriers self-certifying. It will be a third-party agency self-certifying or certifying that the people they are submitting are part of it. And I think the level that you have, 135% of the poverty line, which is about $32,000 for a family of 4. I think that won't be an issue with the $1.5 billion budget cap, because that's about where we are right now. So anyone who is currently participating in Lifeline will still be able to continue participating.
And that's so very important,
Yes.
obviously. Mr. Hunt, your testimony today is, to the committee is truly admirable, and we appreciate so much. I cannot imagine how your loss must affect you every minute of the day, but your perseverance and determination with Kerry's law is remarkable. Thank you so very much, sir. It's common sense legislation as far as I'm concerned. We got to get this done.
Thank you.
Shifting to Director Souter, thank you for being here as well. In your experience, where do these multi-line telephone systems present the biggest challenges to their users? Would the notification system that alerts a central site to the exact location of the emergency as required under Kerry's law cut down on response times in nursing homes and other elder facilities? Also, what about schools?
Schools would be included in that group of multi-telephone line subscribers as well. We're very fortunate in our region that there is a large level of compliance, but this is a very large nation, and there are many hotels throughout the states, and I cannot speak to how many of them are voluntarily being compliant, but clearly I would hope that if this law is passed, it will be a significant incentive so that this problem that does exist in many places will be rapidly addressed and not waiting until the incumbent telephone equipment has lived its life cycle, which could indeed be many years away.
Again, thank you, sir, for your advocacy. Mr. Chairman, can I ask one question of Ms. Smith? If we don't have time,
Yes, no, yeah,
I
not a
can
problem.
enter to the record.
No.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smith, your testimony today obviously is equally heartbreaking. Your loss is unconscionable. In today's modern age of telecommunication, anything short of immediate, in my opinion, is frustrating. It should be immediate. I commend you for working so diligently for so long across our entire country in pursuit of this change. As you know, this law is already saving numerous lives that might otherwise be lost. That in of itself is extraordinary, so thank you so very much. Can you elaborate a bit who this law, as enacted by almost half of the country, I think 22 states, is benefiting the most? Who is it benefiting the most? How could this affect residents in my state of Florida? And I understand we do not have a law on the books.
Thank you, Congressman. Unfortunately, your state has not passed it yet. Who does it benefit the most? The lives that have been saved. I testified to an elderly gentleman who had had a stroke and could not talk, but he could dial his wife's phone. He was recovered. There was a suicide attempt. The young lady had left a note, and she was tracked and found in time. There was a baby, and this made news last year in our area, who was carjacked. Her parents' car was carjacked, and that baby was found in less than 40 minutes, and the police stated it was absolutely because of Kelsey's law. Those are the people that benefit, and And an additional benefit, I believe the very first time Kelsey's Law was ever used in Kansas, there was a young lady murdered, and she was taken to another state, but she came home, and her father does not believe she would have come home. She wouldn't have been found had it not been for Kelsey's Law. Those are the people that benefit from this law.
Thank you so very much. Appreciate it. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
I thank the chair. Mr. Sauter, we have 3 public safety bills on our first panel. Although 2 of these bills seek to strengthen public safety, I'm worried that one may undermine public safety for millions of low-income Americans. This would be the Curb Lifeline Act, which makes so that low-income families may not have access to cell phones. In your experience, how important is it for low-income Americans to be able to use their mobile devices for 911 emergencies?
No different than it is for you or I.
How would cutting off 911 services for low-income Americans impact public safety?
We would have, unfortunately, less calls to respond to, although it wouldn't impact at all the need.
Thank you. Pretty blunt answers there. Ms. Medina, thank you for testifying. What impact would a rigid funding cap on Lifeline have on current and future subscribers?
Well, I live in San Bernardino, the city of San Bernardino, where there's a high population of poverty. And not only that, crime. It would impact significantly because many families can't afford. And currently right now we have a limited amount of internet access. And when you look at, when they were mentioning earlier regarding McDonald's and other places, when you have safety issues in your community, you can't easily just walk to the neighborhood McDonald's or other locations. And we've had recently, unfortunately, two youths, 114 and 112, die while walking to a gasoline station, which is around the corner. So we have incidents in many communities throughout the nation that you can't have. It's not easy to have access, especially after school and walking to different locations. So it definitely makes a huge impact in our communities.
Congressman, if I could just add to that, a hard cap also doesn't take account of the potential for economic crises and downturns or natural disasters. It sets the cap at a limit that may make sense this second, but economic circumstances of families can change very fast, and this could leave people in really dire straits.
And when I do want to mention, when you look at caps, it sets limitations on how many families you can serve. And that's the bottom line. You could have either 100 families that could receive this service, but when you have a cap and you can no longer service them, then what happens to them?
Okay, thank you. As part of the Curb Lifeline Act, support for a standalone mobile voice service would be cut off for many families. Standalone mobile service has become a simple focus of the program, while a majority of the program's participants connect over mobile phones. Can you explain why being able to make voice calls using mobile phones would make the most sense for low-income Americans?
Emergency. I mean, it has to do with emergencies. When I have my 5 children, if I'm not home and they have to access, my teenagers have to access to call me, they have that access to call. And also with finding work. My husband was laid off at one point, and how do you find work? And you have to receive a call when you apply, and as well as internet access as well when you do the applications.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we all want to make sure that low-income families have access to emergency services. Ms. McAuliffe, in your testimony, you stated that broadband internet access is freely available nearly everywhere. You mentioned restaurants, McDonald's, but many low-income Americans have multiple jobs. A lot of these establishments are closed when they have any kind of free time. How can these Americans still access the internet to do essential things like help their kids with homework and apply for better jobs?
Sure. So, and that is true, that those time frames are difficult. And one of the things about the new order is that it does bring in broadband access, and a lot of people are choosing to access on mobile devices. So that also links in, the cost of voice service has gone down so much. So when you bundle both the voice and the data service together, right now we're at the 1.5 billion. It wouldn't cut anyone out, but it would actually add a service. So you would end up with voice and an internet connection rather than neither.
Well, I mean, I don't
Or
think
the one
that's
or the other.
realistic because the subsidy is $9.25 a month, which doesn't really even pay for mobile service, much less mobile plus bundled services. So I would be careful about what that means. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank you for your questions and thank the panel for your testimony today. That's been very useful. And we have a second panel coming up. So with that, thank you for your time, and you're dismissed. We'll call the second panel up. Thank you.
Just ready for tomorrow night? Don't let Scott try to sit down. Now you need one more.
Yes, we got to slide one chair down. Sorry, we're just trying to.
That seems fair.
You have to stand for your testimony. That's what he said. He thought he'd just have him stand and hold the microphone.
Yeah.
Hi, Kelsey Guyselman.
Oh, hi,
We emailed
Kelsey.
back and forth
Yes,
a little bit. Thank
very
you
nice
so
to
much
meet
for
you.
testifying. We
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
We, we're up against some big hearings today, so the
understand.
attendance is a little bit down, but luckily,
I understand. Just happy to be here, Kelsey.
yes, we're happy to have your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you.
Me too.
Adam Jordy, the
Hey,
Mayor's
Adam.
office.
Dan Oldie. Great meeting you.
Nice
I saw the
meeting you.
congressman in here a little bit
Yeah,
earlier,
he was
but I know he had got a little, going a little long
He
here.
has a few other things, yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
we thought this may go a little long here, but he may try to get back in here if he can get away from his
Okay.
other meetings, so.
Now, you do health, LA?
I do health,
Okay.
health, telecom.
Oh, you do telecom
financial
as well?
services, so.
Okay. I'll give you one of my cards here so we can connect, but I'll be in contact with you as time goes on. But appreciate getting to meet you. I've not met.
If we could have the witnesses grab a seat, we'll get going here. Are we missing Sergeant Finley?
Yeah, I don't know where he is.
Grace, we're still waiting on one. I think she
All right, we'll just wait a second for Detective Finley to join us. Okay, now that the panel is here, we can get moving on the second panel. During this panel discussion, we're going to be talking about H.R. 2031, the Anti-Swatting Act of 2015, H.R. 3998, Securing Access to Networks in Disasters, or SANDY Act, H.R. 4111, the Rural Healthcare Connectivity Act of 2015, and H.R. 4190, the Spectrum Challenge Prize Act of 2015. So with that, the witnesses each will have 5 minutes for their testimony. The lights there will let you know green is good, yellow means start to wrap up, and red means we're going to cut you off. With that, Detective Sergeant Finley, we'll begin with you. Welcome, and thank you for your testimony.
There we go. Can you hear me okay, Mr. Collins?
Yeah, sometimes you do have to lean close
All
to
right.
the microphone. We'd appreciate that.
Thank you for your time, sir. Again, thank you, Mr. Collins, Ranking Member Eshoo. Thank you to all the members up here today. Again, my name is Detective Sergeant Finley from the Johns Creek Police Department in Johns Creek, Georgia. 20-year veteran of law enforcement. I'm currently the supervisor of a criminal investigations unit in my department. The majority of the crimes that I investigate are internet and cyber-related crimes, and over the last couple of years, I've had quite a bit of experience and success investigating, swatting, hoax 911 calls in which spoofing technology was utilized. But first, let me say it is an honor and a privilege to be here today, be in front of this committee and provide testimony on this important issues. And some of the things that we'll speak of today are, quite a few of them are listed in my written stuff, and I won't go over each and every one of those, but I'll just give you a couple examples of some of the things that I've been involved in. In 2014, I was a lead investigator in a multi-state and international swatting investigation that involved a serial swatting suspect who had swatted 40-plus cities here in the United States and Canada. He had terrorized multiple families all over the United States and was responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars in wasted time and resources by local and federal law enforcement officers responding to these fake incidents. He used VoIP technology as well as anonymizer websites, spoofing technology, multiple emails, and social media profiles to hide himself. During this same time period, I was investigating another swatting hoax 911 incident involving an individual who lived up in the northeast portion of the United States, and in his hoaxes, he was using several layers of spoofing technology. He actually had a spoofing phone app. He actually created his own spoofing website and then ran that through a nationally known spoofing company. He also incorporated the VoIP services as well, and as you can imagine, it took quite some time to sort through all of this to find him with this multi-layered spoofing. He also used some voice disguising software on that, which made it even more difficult to finally uncover who he is. But you know, in a lot of these situations, we talk about, or you hear on the news about the incident that was called in, how many law enforcement were involved, how many ambulances and all that other stuff. And a lot of people, I think, forget about the actual victim, what happens to them. And sometimes I don't think they really understand that they suffer some intense emotional distress and trauma as well. In one of these incidents that I investigated, a male caller had called our 911 center, and he said that, all right, he said, I killed the mom, I killed the dad, I killed the little boy in the house, and I've got the little girl right here, and I need $30,000 or I'm killing her too. The only people that were present in the home that day were a nanny and a babysitter. There were two small children in the home at the time of the swatting call. Mom and dad were both gone. They both found out by friends calling them and telling them that they'd seen their house on the news and that something horrible had happened there. So imagine as a parent that you get a call and you rush home thinking that your entire family has been killed. And as you get there, you see multiple police vehicles lining up and down the street, police officers in the cul-de-sac pointing rifles at your home, EMS crews and stretchers are out on the street with ambulances and stretchers standing by for resulting casualties. I was there that day, and I saw that mother as she was running through her neighbor's yards trying to get to the home. She was in a panic. She was totally distraught and had a look of horror on her face. We had to physically restrain her and tell her that her children were fine and that they were sitting in the back of our fire chief's vehicle. And to see the raw emotion pour out of that woman that day as she embraced her children and just sobbed out loud, it affected everyone there. That's when you realize the impact that these swatting hosts can have on these victims. And it truly makes you angry to know that someone did this for fun. And it motivates you to want to go find out who this person is and find them. It also makes you wonder what type of person would derive some type of enjoyment out of doing this to people. Some of the other crimes I investigated that involve this spoofing, one of them is quite popular this time of year, and that is the IRS scam, where people call and they'll use the local IRS number to appear on your phone and say that, hey, we're from the IRS, you owe us money, we're either going to lock you up or deport you or whatever, and people readily pay this money because they're scared to death of the IRS. Another scam is the arrest warrant scam, where they call up and say you have a warrant for your arrest, we're going to take you to jail if you don't pay this amount of money. People that don't have normal contact with law enforcement don't realize that we don't call you and tell you we have warrants for your arrest. We show up at your house to come get you. But these are just a few examples of the criminals that utilize spoofing technology to facilitate their crimes. I hope it's given you a little bit of a better understanding of what goes on in these situations. They're not harmless pranks as some might describe them. When you see the toll it takes on some of these families that have gone through some of these situations, you'll understand. We do need good legislation to deal with this issue, and our technology increases so will these incidents. It's important to note that these criminals will always update their techniques to use the most recent technology to help further their criminal enterprise. They will always use and abuse any new technology to help them exploit companies or people. And at the end of the day, the American people are going to look to both of us for help. They're going to look to you to make the good laws, and they're going to look for me to enforce them. I thank you for your time today and for the honor and privilege of being here before this institution and talking to you guys, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that testimony. There's things we can't conceive of, and this happens to be
Yes, sir.
in that category. So we may have some other questions afterwards. Thank you very
problem,
much.
sir.
Mr. Bergman, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you to the chair, and thank you to Chairman Walden and Ranking Member Eshoo and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to provide CTI's input on 4 of the initiatives that you'll consider today. CTI appreciates this subcommittee's continued interest in wireless policy and efforts to keep Americans safe and connected, while encouraging innovation and investment in the world's most vibrant wireless marketplace. CTI has a long history of working closely with this committee to address public safety and emergency preparedness. From the adoption of 911 to wireless emergency alerts and FirstNet, we have partnered with you to help keep Americans safe. In that vein, we appreciate Ranking Member Pallone's introduction of H.R. 3998. The district he represents suffered great damage from Superstorm Sandy.
Excuse me, is your microphone on?
Thank you, sir. The district he represents suffered great damage from Superstorm Sandy, and lessons from that experience spurred the Sandy Act. I'm pleased to report that H.R. 3998 and corresponding interest from Chairman Wheeler and the FCC have encouraged meaningful dialogue about steps to improve disaster preparedness. Carriers are making progress towards a framework that would address many elements included in the bill, including identifying new ways to help consumers be prepared when disaster strikes, making sure that critical public safety personnel can contact wireless providers, engaging local governments to enhance their readiness, and giving providers flexibility to help one another restore service. Given this progress, we do not consider new legislative or regulatory actions necessary, but we absolutely commend Representative Pallone for his leadership. Turning to H.R. 4190, CTI supports the Spectrum Challenge Prize Act. CTI's members invest heavily in research and development to improve spectral efficiency. But with demand for mobile broadband continuing to rise, more progress is needed. A challenge program such as that proposed by Representative Matsui may incentivize breakthroughs that can benefit consumers and our economy. CTI believes that a comprehensive approach to wireless policy should focus on efficiency and also on identifying additional spectrum and streamlining processes for deploying network architecture. CTI commends Chairman Walden and the subcommittee for your work to expedite the deployment of communications infrastructure on federal properties and the approval of H.R. 1641, the Federal Spectrum Incentive Act. We would also highlight the FCC's important efforts to make available spectrum above 24 gigahertz, which offers promise as we move towards 5G services. We welcome your help in ensuring that the Commission adopts rules this summer to bring high-band spectrum to market. Collectively, these initiatives will help the U.S. retain its world leadership in advanced wireless services. Moving to the Lifeline bill, CTI's views are informed by two main points. First, that all Americans should have access to high-quality communication services. And second, that universal service policies should recognize consumers' increased preference for wireless services. While CTI appreciates the subcommittee's interest in ensuring a more efficient Lifeline program, we are concerned that a cap will inherently exclude low-income consumers that Lifeline is intended to support. CTI is also concerned that eliminating support only for mobile voice services would reverse long-standing consensus that USF policy be technology neutral. The subcommittee may wish to consider whether it would be appropriate to transition the entire USF program to a general revenues model. Wireless consumers today bear almost half of the annual $8 billion USF contribution burden, while 75% of that support goes to non-wireless services. A general revenues approach would give this subcommittee the opportunity to consider funding levels, affordability, and inter-industry subsidies implicated under the current approach. Finally, CTI supports H.R. 4889, the Kelsey Smith Act, with the addition of one critical provision. We urge the inclusion of clear, unambiguous language to ensure that any carrier complying with the Act is protected from civil or administrative liability. Adoption of appropriate liability safeguards will ensure that carriers that comply with law enforcement requests have the necessary protection to aid in the response to critical, life-threatening emergencies. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Appreciate your testimony. Now, Mr. Holdenson, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Collins and Ranking Member Eshoo and other members of the subcommittee. I am here today and have the honor to appear before you to support bipartisan legislation, H.R. 4111, the Rural Health Care Connectivity Act of 2015. This was sponsored by subcommittee members Lance, Loebsack, and Kramer. I respectfully ask that my written testimony be submitted. My name is Dan Holthusen, and I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Evangelical Lutheran Good Samaritan Society. The Society is the nation's largest not-for-profit, faith-based senior care and services organization. It was founded in 1922 and is headquartered in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We offer a broad spectrum of senior services, including not only skilled nursing care, but also home health, respite care, assisted living, post-acute care, senior apartments, and affordable housing and hospice care. Currently, the Society serves more than 240 locations across the country in 24 states, caring daily for more than 30,000 people and employing more than 23,000 staff members. On behalf of the Society and the American Healthcare Association, which is the nation's largest association of long-term and post-acute care providers, I would like to express our strong endorsement of the Rural Health Care Connectivity Act. If enacted, this bill would offer substantial and critical support for not-for-profit and public providers of skilled nursing care that operate in rural and frontier areas across the country. The Society currently operates 168 skilled nursing facilities, also called SNFs, of which 122, or about 3/4 of those, are in the Universal Service Administrative Company-defined rural areas. In fact, we have facilities in many of your districts, including Oregon, Iowa, North Dakota, Ohio, Kentucky, and Kansas. These SNFs play a critical role in the delivery of care in rural and frontier areas of our country and are significant and growing pioneers in telehealth services. Like many providers serving an aging population, the Society is a provider of skilled nursing care in many rural areas of the country. As such, we are dependent on the growing use of technology to deliver needed care and services to locations that do not have the benefit of nearby health clinics or rural hospitals. The use of broadband networks is critical to accommodate the delivery and exchange of data, images, web streaming, electronic medical records, and other health information that is vital to ensure that the day-to-day care needs of residents and patients are met. Further, an important resource for assisting with the funding of these broadband networks is the Universal Service Fund that is administered by the FCC. Although the majority of our healthcare partners in rural areas of the country are afforded the privilege of accessing Universal Service Fund to assist with funding broadband investment, skilled nursing facilities are not. It has been our long-held belief that Congress fully intended to make rural, not-for-profit, long-term care SNFs as eligible healthcare providers under Section 254 of the 1996 Telecom Act. In fact, on several occasions, we provided both informal and formal comments to the FCC expressing these strong-held views. With the passage of this bill, the FCC will have the direction it needs to continue to develop the Healthcare Connect Fund and implement the Healthcare Broadband Experiment Program so that SNFs can benefit along with other covered healthcare providers. In conclusion, we are extremely grateful for your leadership on this important issue that deeply impacts some of society's most vulnerable populations, our nation's seniors, and we strongly urge the committee's swift adoption of the bipartisan bill, especially given that the bill was recently scored by the CBO as resulting in a net deficit, net reduction in the deficit. We hope to get this bill across the finish line soon and to have access to these funds within a year of enactment. Again, we are particularly thankful to the number of members, namely Representatives Lance, Loebsack, and Kramer, for their support of this bill. I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to strongly support the Rural Health Care Connectivity Act, and I stand ready to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and I apologize for being out. We have two subcommittees meeting in one hearing room today, and so we have multiple things going on, so I appreciate you all being here today. And if I could start with the first question to Sergeant Finley. One of the things the bill does is require that the perpetrator reimburse the law enforcement agencies involved in responding to a swatting call for the cost of the response. I have a two-part question, if I may. The first is, looking back at some of the cases you've worked on, could you give us a range or idea of the kind of dollars we're talking about? And then, absent any reimbursement like this bill would allow, who bears the burden, and what impact does that have on the police department like yours?
Well, sir, to answer part of that the second question first, I guess it would depend on the amount of personnel that was out there. Obviously, on the initial one, response to it, but the part that takes up the most time, obviously, is the post-investigation side of this and trying to find out who this person is, because they are not quick investigations. They are long, labor-intensive, because there are so many different things that you have to follow down, and a lot of these places that provide these services are not even in the United States. They're in other foreign countries, and even though we may have mutual law enforcement treaties with those, me as a municipal police officer trying to call a guy in Moscow, the Russian Federation, to get him to give me records for something that went through a VPN that he owns is probably not going to happen. The fact if he even keeps records. So it depends, I guess, on some situations. Some of the swatting incidents that I've been involved in after the fact have been well up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. One that I spoke with some officers up on the around the New York area. They had an individual that called in about a boat that was sinking off the coast out there that not only involved the NYPD, involved the New Jersey State Police, I think the United States Coast Guard, Homeland Security. They had at least, I think, 8 different aircraft out there for about 4 hours. And if you know anything about aircraft, it takes quite a bit of money to operate one of those, and the air crew that are on there, not to mention all the boats that are in the water doing grid searches for about a 16-mile block looking for this individual, only to find out that they were out there for, I think, right at 9 hours to find out that this was a hoax. The big thing is we're all in law enforcement and all first responders. We're there to help people. And when you call us and tell us bad things are happening, we're going to come there and help. And it's very frustrating when we get to these locations and find out that we mobilized all of this equipment, brought all these people down here, because there is a big thing, obviously, that it takes us away from other things. And we don't know anymore with the way the country is going and the world is going. We don't know if these things are real or not. You call and give us a fraudulent call and say there's an active shooter somewhere. We know that just from past experiences in the last few months, there's no shortage of crazy people. There's no shortage of people who want to come over here and do harm to our country and to our people. So it's very frustrating when we have to expend these types of resources to go to these different locations only to find out that there's nothing there.
Can I interrupt for 1
sir,
second?
you
And
can.
let me ask, when you say that like the Russian Federation, how often do you get a call or calls that would come from a foreign country like that you'd be investigating?
There's quite a few individuals that we've got from foreign countries. I've been involved with one. He was from Canada. Even though it's right next door, it is a foreign country. They're not real big on responding to any legal processes that come from the United States into Canada unless it originates with the RCMP up there in their jurisdiction and/or their local police. So you have to involve all the legal attachés from their country to our country, federal government here to federal government there. It's a long, arduous process. But the relationships I've made with the guys in the FBI Atlanta Cyber Program, as well as the United States Secret Service down in my area, they routinely find individuals in other countries, and we have to partner with them to go in and get these people into custody. And a lot of times we end up doing the prosecution in the home country because it's going to be cost prohibitive for us to go and get this person and bring them back down to the United States. We can work with them and say, look, we're going to do the same for you if you'll do the same for us. And it's just a long process to do that. But I mean, to put a dollar amount on it, I cannot tell you how much. I probably spent 1,000-something hours investigating just on two of the cases that I had that were running simultaneously. One with a kid up here in the Northeast United States, the other one in Canada. I mean, that's not to count you count the 43 other agencies that I linked him to and all the time that I spent coordinating with the other 43 agencies, because I ended up being the go-to guy in the United States for all of them to send their information to and funnel that through the FBI Atlanta office up to the RCMP. So we were the clearinghouse, so to speak. We sat down with 40-some-odd cases and went through each and every one of them to try to find out the top 10 best cases that we had to send up here on this individual, because he literally was just an internet terrorist. There's no other word for him, but he was an internet terrorist. The things that he did, we could talk for the rest of the afternoon, and the horrible acts that he did to young people, to young ladies especially, was his target.
Thank you. You know, if I could ask the gentle lady for her indulgence, since we have 3 members right now, would you mind if we did just second questions, the follow-up, if we could do 5 each and then come back and do 5 again? Would that be acceptable?
What time do you think we're going to finish?
Well, it'll be about 15 minutes or so.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. The chair recognizes the gentle lady, the ranking member of the subcommittee from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. You did an excellent job. To Mr. How do you pronounce the name? Holdbusen?
Holdhusen, yes.
Holdbusen, thank you for your work. It's it's never to be taken for granted what nonprofit and church organizations, charitable organizations do in our country. It's nothing short of remarkable. So, thank you to you for your work, and I think that the bill that you're here in support of is a good one. It's going to help people, and that's what I came to Congress to do. So, not to hurt anybody, but to help people. To Mr. Bergman, the recently adopted FCC Lifeline Reform Order phases out, as you know, the support for voice-only services by 22. Does your association support that provision?
So we supported the evolution of Lifeline to broadband services. We thought was critical was to have a sufficient transition timeline so that the 9 million or more low-income consumers who have mobile voice services today can make that transition.
But what's the difference between the legislation we're considering today and the recent FCC action with respect to the phase-out of voice-only services? Because there's a difference.
So what we pushed for was a longer transition period, which is what the FCC adopted. We certainly appreciate their sensitivity to that transition, so that as that program evolves from voice to broadband, low-income consumers can make that transition.
And to Sergeant Finley,
Yes, ma'am.
You're a great witness. You really are.
Thank you, ma'am.
You bring your professionalism is right out there in front. And the passion that you bring to your professionalism, and I think that it's very important. In the cases where there are minors that are inflicting this great harm on people. How do you think the legislation deals with the fine that's attached to it?
Well, as far as it goes,
What's the best way for us to do that? It doesn't seem to me realistic that we're going to extract what should be extracted in terms of a penalty. And my sense is that from what you said, that there are a lot of young people that are doing this.
yes, ma'am. There are some adults that actually do this. It depends on where they're at when
Yeah.
they graduate from 17 to 18 years old, depending on what they classify as an adult. But the biggest issue with anybody that is a juvenile, prosecuting them in the federal system is almost impossible, or they're not going to do it. I mean, short of some kind of heinous crime, terrorism, or mass homicide, they're not going to be prosecuted in federal court.
But we couldn't we structure this so that there is a responsibility either on the part of the individual or the family?
Yes, ma'am, you very well could.
In terms of fines?
Yes, there's quite a few states that do have state legislation on swatting.
What's the best one?
You know, I don't know who's the best one. I'll go ahead and tell you. I think Georgia is. Could I just help going forward? The state of Georgia. It's waiting on our governor.
There you
It's waiting
go.
on our governor to sign it right now. But it all depends. The biggest thing is they have to have some type of recourse for the victim. Obviously, the heartache and whatever it put them through. But one thing that I found, even when we were doing our law in Georgia, one of our victims was there at the state capitol when we were doing some subcommittee hearings, and it was a year and a half later. And she was standing in the hall, and we started talking about it. She just broke down and started crying.
Over what she had done?
And I'm thinking to myself, you know, she loves the police. She loves everything, but when her kids are outside in the street, if one of our cars comes down the street that's doing a neighborhood patrol, she freaks out and thinks, oh my gosh, are they coming to my house? Because unfortunately for her and their situation, they used to live in a location where a person that they were actually targeting was. This family had nothing to do with it. And one of them who did the initial swatting at the house, and then the kid in Canada came back and did a follow-up 8 days later. So 2 times within a couple of weeks, their family was influenced by this. And
Well, do you have any advice for us on?
Well, this law does a good job. It does some really good stuff, and it does handle a lot of spoofing. But what happens when they don't spoof? What do we do then? What if they don't use spoofing technology in this? How are we going to address that situation? I know there's some other,
Well, there are an awful lot of laws that are
Yes,
written in reaction to less than good things taking place. So I guess that's when we would
Absolutely.
address it. But one bill, I don't think is going to, do that.
No.
I think that's what you're
Yes, ma'am.
instructing
There
us.
is actually Congresswoman Clark from Massachusetts. She has an interstate swatting bill right now that covers a lot of things I think that may be missing in this respect, okay? And
Well,
I
maybe
think
we should take a look at that.
those
Mr.
are
Chairman.
two very good things there.
Yeah.
Her and I, we were down at South by Southwest a couple of months ago speaking on the same issue and talking about some of that at the inaugural online harassment summit
Uh-huh.
because she deals with a lot of the same issues. And
Mhm.
quite honestly,
Well, that's very helpful to us, though. I think that we should review and see what Congresswoman Clark has in her bill that maybe we can merge them or strengthen one because of the other.
Well, she'll
So,
give you some
thank
good
you.
testimony because
Yeah.
she got swatted a couple of months ago.
Oh,
That's what I told her office. I said, anytime you stick your neck out and do any of this stuff, just know that you're going to be a target.
Well, thank you to the three of you. You cover very important sectors of our country, from law enforcement to communications to charitable organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Dakota for 5 minutes.
Here, you want to use ours?
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of the outstanding witnesses. It really was great testimony. I agree with the ranking member. Mr. Holthusen, thank you especially for being here on behalf of our bill. for your incredible testimony. But first, let me say thank you for the incredible work of the Good Samaritan Society in North Dakota, South Dakota, throughout the Midwest. As you know, I am very familiar with your facilities and many of your residents over the years, and I appreciate your good work. And getting to the point of this bill, I appreciate very much that you referenced in your testimony the fact that the score came back as a net gain, if you will, for the taxpayers. But even at that, even with our sort of static scoring system in Congress, I don't think it adequately captures what in my mind is the real cost-benefit analysis. Anytime we provide greater access to whether it's to critical access hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, home health care, the use of technology to increase access certainly is good for the residents and the patient, certainly, helpful to those that are providing it. But I think sometimes we don't adequately address or speak of the other benefits of that to not just to the residents and the healthcare provider, but to the taxpayers. Is there any type of an example you could think of that I could use as a cost-benefit analysis where perhaps access to the technology provides somebody the opportunity, whether it's in preventative measure or maybe an emergency that's captured that wouldn't otherwise be addressed? Because I just think there's a lot more to this story even than we know today.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Congressman. Indeed, there are many stories, even beyond anecdotal, and we're beginning to amass empirical data that identifies that. I can give you one very concrete example, and that is with what we call our Living Well at Home program. It allows a couple of major objectives. One is, and most importantly, it's patient or individual-centric. It allows individuals to stay in their living environment independently for as long as possible. It's a motion sensor technology that captures different data points and sends it through broadband, which is why this bill is important. And it goes to a place where, in a remote location, where the preconditions can be identified and identify things that will, from a practical point of view, begin to bend the cost curve, eliminate or reduce the number of emergency room visits, eliminate rehospitalizations, which are very, very costly to the system. In addition, kind of the social benefits beyond that is it provides not only the independent opportunity to be independent for much longer, but also security of families. We can live states away, rely on technology to follow as a consumer my mother, who now lives 3 states away, and identify many things that are going on in her particular life. So there's social aspects. In particular, we look at the individual-centric to allow individuals to stay in their homes much longer, and then the cost savings associated with identifying preconditions which avoid those hospitalization, gets in front of the health conditions prior to the time that they actually exist and then begin to cost the care system much more money.
Mr. Chairman, I will not run the risk of screwing up a really good answer, so I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back, and I was going to actually give you an extra minute since you were having problems with your mic there. But the gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask my questions of Mr. Bergman. I mentioned in my opening statement that Hurricane Sandy hit my district particularly hard, and I've spent the last 3 years studying what went wrong and how we can do better next time. And the result of that work is a bill I introduced last year called the Sandy Act, which is one of the bills we're considering today. It would help ensure that people have essential access to communications networks when they need them the most. In your testimony, you note that telecom carriers are making progress towards a framework that will address many of the elements included in my bill, and I thank you for your work and appreciate the industry's commitment to working with us to help solve these problems. In my experience, regulations are not always necessary when an industry steps up and commits to solving a problem voluntarily. So that said, I'm interested in hearing exactly where the industry is headed on these issues. Could you explain what steps industry is taking to address, some of these issues in my bill, and how long you think it would take to reach a resolution?
So thanks so much for the question, and thank you, Congressman, for your leadership on this issue. We know how important it is, and the introduction of the Sandy Act, I think, really did spur meaningful industry conversations. As you've noted, we've been hard at work to develop a consensus framework on how to improve preparedness for consumers, for communities, and then for carriers as well too. I'm confident that the wireless industry has been a good partner in this effort and will continue to be so, and certainly very hopeful that we'll be able to coordinate with your office to have that effort bear fruit very soon.
But you don't want to talk about any specifics now that the industry is working on?
Sure, absolutely. So I would sort of put things into a couple different buckets. Working to make sure that consumers have all of the information that they need and that they're prepared in advance of disaster situations. Making sure that local governments as well too are educated and ready so that municipal governments can respond. I would say also making sure that critical public safety personnel have the ability to contact wireless providers in the case of a disaster. And then finally, making sure that providers themselves can work together where appropriate to make sure that we can restore service quickly. Those are the 4 areas that are really a focus for us.
Now, what about the 9/11 call centers? Are you working with local governments and 9/11 call centers to make sure that public safety officials can contact carriers during an emergency? You want to talk about that at all?
Sure. That obviously, as you've heard throughout the day, as consumers rely on wireless service more and more to reach public safety, right? By some estimates, over 70% of 911 calls coming from wireless phones. We think that's absolutely critical, and communication between PSAPs and providers is very much something that we're thinking about as well too.
All right, let me go to the Lifeline bill, which I've been critical of. We've heard a lot about needing to control the cost of the program, and I have said that one way to fix this is to adopt policies that help people find well-paying jobs so they don't need to subscribe to the Lifeline program. But are there any other ways to help control costs or improve the program without taking phones away from people who need them?
Sure. So, for a number of years, CTIA has worked closely to try to improve program administration. Going back to 2012, industry worked voluntarily to help develop the duplicates database to make sure that the same subscriber didn't get more than one Lifeline subscription. But I think the most critical reform there is the adoption of a national verifier. That's something that CTI has pushed hard for a number of years, and something that I think that all parties can agree is critical to making sure that Lifeline services get to the people who need it, but only to the people who are eligible to receive it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask one more thing. I know CTIA has talked a lot about making sure we enable next-generation wireless technology, and I believe we should examine how to leverage the benefits of new technology to help address priorities like, addressing inequality. Can you tell us how next-generation wireless technology could help the people stuck on the wrong side of this inequality gap?
So as we think about what the next generation of wireless will be, and folks are looking towards 5G, there will be tests here in the U.S. This year. There's a development of standards. I think some of the most exciting applications of 5G and the Internet of Things are around the policy priorities that are so important to this community and this committee. Things like improving healthcare, improving education. Smart cities is one of the key focuses for 5G technology. So making sure that we are able to launch autonomous vehicles that can cut down on congestion, reduce energy loss, right? Trying to have that 100 times increase in the number of devices that are connected is why you see mayors across the country lining up to become the first smart city. So that's some of what we're looking forward to from 5G, and we certainly appreciate this committee's help and support delivering spectrum, speeding infrastructure, deployment to help us get there.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. And seeing no other members here to ask questions, I'd just like to first thank our witnesses for being with us today. And I know that the gentleman from Oregon, the chairman of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee, and also the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranker of the full committee, we thank you for your testimony today. It's been very, very informative. And if there's nothing else to come before the subcommittee today, we will stand adjourned.
Pleasure to be on the panel.
Hey, you
Thanks
too,
for
my
all you
friend.
do.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you.
Great job over there. Looked like everybody did a good job. That's okay. Of course, I was standing in the hall when they called us. Or the 911 stuff, depending on where it's at. So you have a point of contact on where you're sending it. It's not just sent online. It is sent to an individual. So when you get done, you say, where did you send this information? Verizon, where did it go to? Well, I've got it right here. Federal leverage. Oh. And then that's where the end is. There's no unaccountability. It's not just getting slung out there.
I mean,
There's always.
I don't know how big that
Violate that, then you end up getting.
but I mean,